Well, I couldn't decide on one thing for today, so I think I'm going to try and go in a couple different directions. We'll see if time allows, or if I just go on talking about one thing the whole time. But there was a study published by the Finnish government. I guess they commissioned the study, and it was on the topic of net zero by 2050. And shocker, shocker, they came to the conclusion that there is not enough lithium and cobalt on this planet to supply the very mineral-heavy and mining-happy economy that the elites are building for our future. I'm surprised that the Finnish government would publish such a study, but the results are common sense. You can just look at the plans that they have, how often you have to replace these batteries, the fact that they go into landfills, all stuff I've talked about a million times. And, I'm just a Yahoo on the internet. I'm not even a Yahoo on the internet with influence. They're talking about replacing stuff that's built with iron ore, i.e., the internal combustion engine. Iron ore, the most plentiful resource on Earth. They're going to replace that with lithium and cobalt. Those are your new engines. Are lithium batteries. We're being sold these lithium battery so-called generators at the hardware stores. People are very confused. I had an elderly neighbor talking to me about this. She said, I see these silent generators that they're selling at the store. And they couldn't figure it out. And I said, well, that's just because it's a battery that you have to charge. And it's a battery that's going to go dead at some point. And batteries are not a new idea. There's a so-called Baghdad battery. Who knows if, the Ancient Aliens, of course, the Ancient Aliens crew says that it was created by the aliens, I think. But it's in a museum in Baghdad, and what it may indicate is that humans have been able to store electrical energy in a battery for thousands of years. And despite that, we can't use them. We haven't ever been able to use batteries to power the whole of our society. Humanity has a long history of developing the concept of the electrical battery. And the batteries that are being produced today are less recyclable, more disposable, and more costly on the environment than ever. It will be interesting to see if this Finnish study, and I'll link to an article which is writing up the study, gets much traction outside of Finland or even in Finland itself. Because I would think that if there were true believers, like rational people who honestly thought that the net zero thing was like best for the planet or whatever. Let's just say that they were real tree huggers, which I would consider myself to be a tree hugger. I love trees. I don't like seeing forests torn down to build cookie cutter deed restricted communities. With their one way in, one way out gates that dump, 500 houses out onto one entrance onto the road and creates a problem for everyone else. I hate that crap. Anyone who's stuck to this channel for a long time knows that. Yet I hate green politics and I oppose it with every ounce of my being because it's all a great green grift. It's a plot to set all of our society on fire and completely destroy our standards of living in order to enrich a few people and their investors. It's really that cynical. And that's the most favorable interpretation of what's going on. A more cynical interpretation would be that they're doing this purposefully to destroy people's standards of living to make them more easy to control. Because anyone, you don't even need a calculator, anyone with common sense who has thought this through knows that it is not going to work. Net zero means they're turning the lights off. That's it. If you live in Great Britain, the countdown to your demise has begun. And frankly, in Great Britain, things could be over much, much sooner. Look, the whole place is collapsing in on itself as we speak People can't afford their power bills as it is. How do you think that they're going to survive in a net zero world? They're not. Ultimately, I think if this green Great Reset stuff continues, what it's going to lead to is a modern equivalent of the revolutions of 1848. I think across the West, you're going to see people rise up out of desperation, and governments across the West will fall. Some may survive, but they will be isolated. And Europe was never the same after the revolutions of 1848. You know, some of their leaders survived, like Franz Josef of Austria, but the Austrian Empire is not around these days, is it? And, you know, maybe some European countries like Germany, where the people just have zero self-esteem, they hate themselves, they're nihilistic, they're on the edge of committing suicide as it is. You know, maybe the Germans will never stand up for their rights, but let's just say, you know, Hungarians, Poles, Italians, I think the French, they won't go along with this, not easily. I don't think that those people will just tolerate having the lights turned off forever, because that's what this means. I don't think that they'll tolerate not having any transportation. In fact, the only form of transportation around town that would really work under the Great Reset regime would be cable cars, because they don't require batteries, and you know, they're also electric. And you know, I always thought the cable cars, you know, like in San Francisco, looked charming. I wish the city still had those. But obviously, that is not going to fulfill the transportation needs of every European and North American. Certainly wouldn't fulfill my needs, or anyone certainly in the state of Florida. I mean, Florida was a state built entirely after the advent of the automobile. Florida is completely suburban in its layout, you could say. Even in the major cities, nobody takes the bus really, and we don't have subways. You can't even tunnel underground here. It'll fill up with water. We're at sea level. You're not doing that. There's no rock. There's no bedrock to you know, tunnel into. The entire Western world was built to run on fossil fuels, and it will continue to do so. If those fossil fuels are taken away, the Western world simply will not run. And hopefully the Finns will start to wake up to that. Although I don't have much hope for that, for them, considering you know, that what do they have, the youngest president in all of, maybe on the planet, but at least in Europe. Wasn't she like 32 or something, and you know, caught doing lines at a nightclub? Yeah, I don't think that the Finnish president is going to save us from the World Economic Forum and their great green grift. I mean, she's probably you know, a member of the WEF Youth League. I'd have to look it up, but I would be surprised if she wasn't, if she made it to be the president of a European country at the age of 32 and she's not a part of the WEF Youth League, or whatever the hell they call it. I mean, hell, we here in America can't even get Glenn Youngkin, the firebrand governor of Virginia, who won on the back of rage against the Democrats destroying our society. Even he, which I'm afraid to say I'm not shocked, because I believe at the time, if you go back on this channel, my memory's not that good, but I know what I would have thought of him, since he was the CEO of the Carlyle Group. I probably would have told most of you on this channel that the man was a demon, even if he was better than Terry McAuliffe. He still wasn't a good guy. He's still an agent of your enslavement. Here he is in the last couple of weeks telling us that the problem with the Great Reset Net Zero agenda is that they're rushing into it. The Democrats, they're so reckless. They don't think about the consequences, you see. They want to dive headfirst into stuff, and we need a more gradual transition so that the proles don't get restless. That's what Glenn Youngkin thinks. He just thinks, hey, we need to paper over this better. We need to hide it from them so that before they realize it, we've completely taken away their standards of living and driven them into poverty. And there's nothing they can do about it by that point. The way the Democrats are doing it, the people are going to wake up, and all our fun will be spoiled. That's what Glenn Youngkin is worried about. You know what, though? Maybe I should thank Putin for something. I think that the elites taking advantage of the war in Ukraine, which I said just yesterday, I wasn't going to talk about it anymore, but this is indirect. I'm not talking about the war itself. I'm talking about effects surrounding the war. They took advantage of Putin invading Ukraine to say, oh, we're just going to completely cut off our relationship with Russia and stop buying Russian oil and gas. And that is destroying the European energy market and, frankly, the global energy market, because now they're buying it from here, as I've talked about countless times. And now we have Bill Gates saying that, oh, this is a great opportunity because now we can accelerate the net zero transition. And the faster they do this, the more pain people will feel, as Glenn Youngkin noted, and the more likely they are to wake up and say, you know what, this really isn't the way that I want to live. And so I'll thank Pooty Poot for that, by giving the Europores enough rope to hang themselves. Because it is true that the harder they push, the more people will push back. And that's what we need. People are not pushing back hardly at all at this point. People are not awake. They don't realize it. They still think that this is about saving the trees, when in reality it's about their own enslavement, their own subjugation. Because that's what will happen. You'll be rendered a serf with a living standard below that of, your average, 1950s factory worker. Which, hey, I get that people romanticize that time, but we have a lot more stuff now than we did then. People did not have all of the luxuries and goods back then that we have today. Although I guess by the 50s, a factory worker, not only were they supporting their family, but they could afford a refrigerator and stuff like that. So you know what? Let me turn that back to maybe 1920s, when your average person couldn't afford a refrigerator or, electric kitchen appliances at all. Maybe they had electric light, give them that. Electric light, but certainly no air conditioning. So I guess I'll keep my eye out at this point to see if you have more official sources start to wake up, or people like that, because, this is such a glaringly obvious problem. I hope that within a couple of years it becomes a major issue and is much more commonly discussed. So anyway, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.